Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and it is the first week of 2024. So I am looking back over some of the books that I read in 2023. I want to do a series of videos of what I liked and what I disliked. Now, I'm going to start off with my most disappointing books of 2023. I considered calling this the worst books that I read in 2023, but I know that some people actually like some of the books that I am going to be mentioning here. There's at least two books that are on two different booktubers' top 10 lists of the year. So some of these books are good for some people, but to me, when I read them, they were total disappointments. Just not my jam, as they would say. So we'll just leave it at disappointments instead of necessarily saying they're a bad book. But what were my 10 most disappointing books in 2023? This is not a list in any particular order. I was reviewing books in my database, looking over what I liked and what I disliked, and I just picked out what I thought were close to my top 10 disappointments. So, at slot number 10, Bodywork, The Radical Power of Personal Narrative by Melissa Febos. I read this for the BookTube prize, so this was not a book that I would have selected on my own. Even when I was nominating books for the BookTube prize, this was not one of them that I nominated. So what is this? This is part memoir, part writing advice. Melissa Febos was known for her first book about her experiences as a sex worker in the dominatrix trade or industry, however you want to call this. And this book is basically advice pretty much geared towards women about how to write about their sex lives and liberate themselves through that experience. Now, when I was a much younger man, in my 20s, I very much wanted to be a writer. Now that I'm approaching 60, I really have no desire whatsoever to write again. So writing advice, it just goes over my head. And if I were ever to write, I would not write about my personal sex life. I would write about something else. So this book was geared towards a totally different demographic than me. And so there's no wonder that this book was a total miss when I read it. Number 9, Almost Transparent Blue by Murakami. Murakami is sort of known as a gritty, grimy, sort of existentialist Japanese writer. This book was originally published in the 70s. And during the 70s, I think this would have been groundbreaking and very different because the narrator is young, in his 20s. He does a lot of drugs and has a lot of sex. And I guess that would have been very shocking to the Japanese culture at that time. As me looking back, it just did not appeal to me at all. I have read stories and books about drug addiction. I can think of The Man with the Golden Arm by Nelson Algren, and that was a fascinating book about drug addiction. Sex addiction, sex books. Yeah, I've read books about sex and people having lots of sex, but again, the combination here and in translation, again, just did not work for me. And I was very glad when this book was over. At spot number 8, I'm going to include a book that is a favorite of a lot of booktubers. And that was a book that went to the finals of the BookTube prize. I did not read it as a judge for the BookTube prize. I read it after the prize was done. And the book that I did not like was Foster by Claire Keegan. It is the story of an Irish family that is very poor, and they send their young daughter off to live with some relatives. And the girl is unsure whether she'll be returning to her natural family and has to live out her life as a foster. The writing, as some other booktubers have described, is very beautiful. It's very lovely. But that's really what you get in this book. The lovely writing did not elevate to this book to any high desires or high admiration in my point of view. The characters, well, they're a poor Irish family, and I just don't get along well with books about families and family issues. So I just did not care for it. Although, again, it almost won a prize in the BookTube prize. So a lot of people like this book. Number 7, The Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. This was one of my rereads for Remember December. I had read this probably in the early 2000s, but I didn't remember a thing about it. So I decided to reread it. And when I was rereading it, it was, sort of about alcohol, sex, drugs, and a little bit of Buddhism. I had picked the book because I'm reading about Buddhism, and it was there, but the rest of the book is just rambly. I know Truman Capote accused Jack Kerouac writing as, that's not writing, that's typing. And I can really feel that reading this book. Meandering all over the place, have a little bit, talk about all the girls at a party who get naked and then you get drunk. Talk about Buddhism. Go on to the next chapter. Again, I remember sort of liking it more the first time. I would have probably been in my late 40s, early 50s. But now that I'm older, just didn't hit the mark. Prompt or number 6 is American Dirt by Jeanine Cummins. This was read for a physical book group. This book has a bit of a scandal about it. The author was not Hispanic, or she has some vague ties to Hispanic heritage, maybe even just through her husband. And it was about migrants coming up through Central America, trying to cross over into America. And it is a story of a woman and her young child. Her husband was a journalist who was murdered by drug lords. And it is about her attempt to get into the United States. Hispanics and Latinos really said she did a lot of cultural appropriation, that she did not have the right to write this story. I don't agree with that. I think anyone can write a story about anyone else if they do it clearly and succinctly and honestly. I don't think she accomplished that. This book was written. The author had her butt in the page and she was pounding out the words, but her eyes were looking towards Hollywood. She really envisioned this book being turned into a major motion picture. And I just thought it was rather silly. There's a lot of scenes that I just sort of get, oh yeah, I can see that on the screen. I can see where you're going with that. No. And the cultural appropriation thing, I think that's what really hammered the author in most readers' eyes. But my eyes it just wasn't a very good book to begin with. At number 5, again picked for a book group, is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This is a story of a woman in London whose life is not going the way she wants it to go. So one night, after she got fired and her cat died, she decides to kill herself. And she finds herself in an afterlife, in a library with tons of books. And all the books contain alternate lives, different choices she made at different times in her life that would have led to a different life. And the librarian said, pick a book and live that life. So the book is her going through many different lives that she could have led. An interesting concept, poorly executed. And in the end, I think was just a little too schmaltzy, a little too cheesy when you think about the tragedy of real-life suicide. At number 4, here is again a book that made MJ's Reading This Life top 10, and it is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. I originally tried to read this book when it originally came out in the 90s, and I DNF'd it because I got through about the first third, and I just thought it was really, truly, abominably boring. The writing style of Bret Easton Ellis, well, it's very distant, and he loves to talk about clothing. And that really is what really put me off back when I was young. As an adult, I'm still put off by descriptions of clothing. If a man is wearing a Brooks Brothers suit or an Armani suit or whatever kind of suit, it really doesn't friggin' matter to me. The author could have just said he was wearing a suit. The brand name is absolutely meaningless to me. It's like you're reading the book and the author inserts a lot of foreign words or foreign dialogue and doesn't give you a translation. It becomes nonsense words. It is meaningless. It is distracting. It is aggravating. Now, this book is rather known for its graphic violence towards women. And honestly, that elevated the book. And that's really rather a disturbing thing to say, is the violence was less disturbing than his descriptions of clothing. There's also some discussion about the reliability of the narrator. Now, the problem is that the lifestyle that he leads, and people are saying that, oh, that's a satire of the 80s. I don't think this book is a satire. I think Bret Easton Ellis truly admired this posh, hip clothing lifestyle in New York City. And it was just so over the top that people called it satire. I think it's true admiration. I remember reading a review after reading this book from a journalist who said Bret Easton Ellis is the most disingenuous man he had ever interviewed. I'll take that journalist at his word. And again, I just did not enjoy this book at all. If it cut out the descriptions of clothing, maybe it could have survived as an average book. At number 3, another book that I read for the BookTube Prize. And again, a book that I would never have selected on my own. It is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. Jennette McCurdy was a child star on a Nickelodeon TV show. I never watched the TV show. By the time Nickelodeon came around, I was way too old to be watching those shows. So completely unfamiliar with the shows that she was describing. And it is a story of her mother who pushed her into a child acting career, sort of against her will, and how her mother got the daughter in basically a food disorder situation where she had an eating disorder based on what her mother taught her to do. And the thing is, an eating disorder is a serious illness. But by the time we got up to the eating disorder, I was so rolling my eyes about the life of a childhood star that I was really losing interest. And could an author talk about an eating disorder in a way that interested me? Maybe, maybe not. I don't have a eating disorder, so it's, again, talking about an illness that I don't have, and none of my immediate family or friends have. So, again, this book was written for a completely different demographic than me. At number 2, The Heart Mender by Andy Andrews. This was another book for my book group pick. It is an historical novel set during World War II on the Gulf Coast, where there was a German submarine sinking American ships. That actually sounds like a great story, and it could have been a fabulous story. But it starts off with this really bizarre introduction where the author is talking about after a heavy rain or a hurricane came through his property on the golf course. He was digging up a tree that had died and found this old tin box filled with old German Nazi memorabilia. Had some photos, had some medals, and he started wondering how that tin box got planted under that tree. And then you get to this whole story set during World War II. Now, imagine the most cliched German character that you could think of in a B-rated movie. That's one of the characters that you get in this book. Also, this book was published by Thomas Nielsen. Thomas Nielsen is more known for publishing its Bibles. It is a Christian publishing house. And this story, while Christianity is never explicitly named out, it does talk about the value of going to church and the importance of forgiveness. So this book is Christian fiction. It's lightly disguised. It's not over your head too much, but if you know what you're looking for, you can see the author pushing his religion in this book. And it was just a terrible book. And at number 1 is a book that I read for a BookTube science fiction book group. And it was Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. The person who picked it probably didn't know that this was a young adult science fiction novel. Cory Doctorow is a fairly known and respected science fiction author, but this book is definitely young adult. It's set in a slightly futuristic America. Now, this book was written shortly after 9/11. And so it features a teenager who is in the Oakland, San Francisco area who gets caught up in a terrorist attack. Now, he is not injured, but he is thrown in a jail as a potential terrorist. And he gets out, and the bad, naughty, evil, wicked government, is cracking down on citizens and curtailing their freedoms. It's so you can't live a free life. And it's up to this teenager and a cohort of other teenagers to thwart the government. And I'm just rolling my eyes and going, oh, Lord, it's teenagers. So I did not really like it that much. As I said, I really don't get along well with YA fiction. It's just something that I should leave for other people to read. So those were my 10 most disappointing books of 2023. Again, some of them were other people's favorites, so take that as a grain of salt. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.